Hello, all. Really glad you've joined us this evening. We will be recording this webinar. So we've already hit that button. We'll get started right away. We are very lucky this evening to bring to you a webinar called From Orchards to Prairies. We've got two really great speakers that I think you're going to really enjoy. We'll spend about an hour with you. We'll try to keep it at an hour. The questions might go long, so we'll answer those later if we can't get to all of them. So for the questions, I would like you to use the chat function for an introduction. Tell us who you are, tell us where you're from, and then for any questions that you have throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A function, and we will answer those questions at the end of the program, as many as we can handle before we run out of time. So with that, I won't keep a lot of your time here. My name's Elsa Gallagher, and I am the Habitat Program Director for the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund. And I'll be moderating this session for you and answering questions towards the end. But it is my great pleasure to introduce our friend Christine, who is joining us tonight. Pete will be introducing himself, Pete Berthelsen, so you'll hear a little bit about him. But I did want to introduce Christine and give you a little bit about her background. She farms, so she has an almond orchard smack dab in the middle of the Central Valley in California. She's a second-generation farmer. In 1970, her dad was farming these same acres. In 97, her brother Eric and she started taking over the farm and farming almonds. She has a degree in biology from UC Santa Cruz, where my grandparents lived and my dad was raised for his entire life. She has her MS from Utah State, and that is in fisheries biology. So she understands a lot of the concepts in biology and the research methods that are used to kind of come up with conclusions, which is great. Makes her a great partner for us at the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund. She is also the director of the Almond Board of California, and she sits on our board at the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund as one of our primary board members to help us chart the direction of our organization. And she walks the talk, people. She has used the Project Apis M Seed for Bees program in cover cropping on her farm since the inception of the program. And she's going to share with you some of what she's learned about that program tonight. And I think you're just going to really enjoy this talk because she is a wealth of knowledge. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Pete. And he's going to introduce himself, and then Christine will get a turn to talk to you.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Elsa. So if you're on this webinar tonight and you have an interest in knowing about an $11 billion crop, almonds that are grown in California, and how those are tied to honeybee health from where I'm at in the Midwest and the Great Plains, and just the fascinating interaction and how everything all works together, you're on the right webinar because that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So with that, I'll jump right into this. And my really short introduction is that I'm coming to you tonight from central Nebraska, a part of the world that we refer to as the Loess Hills. It's a region of the country that's kind of evenly divided between rangeland and row crop production, corn and soybeans. This is a little bit of an aerial view of our farm and ranch that we have that really represents that half crops, half rangeland. I am an amateur beekeeper, so I have just enough knowledge about bees and trying to keep them alive to participate in this call. But what I really am is a wildlife biologist that has spent my career trying to design, establish, and manage high quality, high diverse habitat like you see in this image right here. And this kind of stuff can serve lots and lots of purposes, but for tonight's webinar, we're calling this pollinator habitat. So with that, let me get into this webinar. And I'm going to go just a couple of minutes, then we're going to Christine, and then I'll come back at the end with a few more thoughts. But to kind of start it out, I just want to give you the perspective of what I call foundational thoughts, how we think about habitat and how we describe it and how we think about it when we design it. So the first foundational thought that I want to give you tonight is that not all pollinator habitat is created equal. Sometimes I think that when people see a plant flowering, they think it's good for pollinators. And not all plants have the same value for pollinator species. So every time that we design a seed mixture, and for the things that we'll talk about later tonight, it's not just one seed mixture. We use seed mixtures that are custom designed for each project in each state, in each region, and that sort of thing. But we design those seed mixtures very specifically, looking at things like seeding rates, making sure we have things flowering throughout the entirety of the year. But another really key component is that every seed mixture that we design receives a pollinator value score. That's a score that ranges from 0 to 5, with 5 being as a perfect score, as high as you can get. And that is one way that we're able to really sit down and think about how that project is going to work, and we're going to produce maximum pollinator value. Another foundational thought for tonight is that if we try to solve pollinator health and habitat problems using the same tools that we've used for the last decade or two, we will fail. Here's an example of what I mean. This little chart that's in the corner is produced by an organization called Bee Informed Partnership, where they survey hive health and things like that. And this chart is showing you what the annual honeybee hive losses are in this country. And the thing that you want to know is that red line right there is the line of what we consider that to be sustainability. For a beekeeper to be able to be sustainable, their hive losses should not be higher than that red line. Well, not very hard to tell. They're way higher than that. And we're approaching 40% annual hive losses. And if you think about your business, your career, and that sort of thing, think about how challenging it would be if you had to start over with 40% losses every year. Very challenging. Let's give you one more example of how we have to think about how we're doing habitat differently. And that's with the monarch butterfly. And this chart that I'm going to show you here is the population estimate of the eastern monarch butterfly population based on the amount of area that they inhabit, they're in their wintering grounds in central Mexico. And this red line right here is the line at which the population numbers need to be higher than that for this to be a healthy, vibrant, survivable population. And if you look at that, you can see that for 15 to 20 years, we've not been doing well, and it's not looking good. So if we try to solve all these problems using the same set of tools that we've been using for 10 or 15 years, we're not going to make it. We have to think about things differently, and that's where the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund designs what we call next gen habitat projects. And I'll talk about that more later on tonight. But another foundational thought is that we need to make every single acre of habitat the best it can be. We don't have enough. And when we get an acre of it, we need to make sure that it's the best it can be. We can't afford to have any kind of, that's okay acres. They have to be the best that they can be. One of the tools that we've produced to help you make every acre the best it can be is our Pollinator Habitat Establishment and Management Guide. It's available free. We are going to put a link to this document in our chat function, along with some other things as we discuss them tonight. So click on that and check it out. The next foundational thought is that at the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund, we think of ourselves as a big tent. We try to work with everybody that has the goal of positively impacting pollinator health and habitat. Because of that, agriculture is one of our most important partners. And this is important to talk about, I think, because there is a view out there sometimes that if pollinator habitat, like we see right here in this image, is right next to agriculture, and that's a soybean field in the background, some folks feel that if it's within 120 feet of agriculture, it's probably not going to be good. It would be detrimental. And I'm happy to tell you that last month, our friends at Iowa State University published a really important research article in Bioscience that looked at this exact question. Does pollinator habitat like this, right next to agriculture, provide value? And the answer was a resounding yes. The benefits of great pollinator habitat outweigh the potential negative impacts of crop fields that are treated with insecticides. So at the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund, we'll take an acre of habitat wherever we can get it, and then we want to make it the best that it can be. A couple last two kind of foundational thoughts are you have to start and think about what your project objectives are before you do anything. And then we have to think about how do we do site prep? How are we going to plant it? All those things that are really key and integral to the success of your project. And we have biologists that work with every project we touch in a one-on-one fashion to make sure we're delivering that landowner, that project objectives. And at the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund, we're very keenly interested in producing multiple benefits. There perhaps is no better example than this solar energy project, this renewable energy project that's producing clean energy, and how we can get multiple benefits from this by including pollinator health and habitat associated with it. I'm personally very excited about this. I think it's a great opportunity that we have. And it just is the opportunity to bring together all kinds of people with diverse interests. Lots of people out there might not really care about honeybees, they're afraid of them, but they want clean water, or they want healthy soil, or we want grassland songbird populations or monarch butterflies. It brings together all kinds of people. And now we're going to get into what I think is just this fascinating discussion about how orchards in California are directly tied to the prairies of the Midwest and the Great Plains and all other kinds of areas of the country. And that is because Christine is going to tell you about the largest pollinator event in the world that is just on the cusp of starting right now. And that's because honeybees and commercial beekeepers have become what we often refer to as migratory. The bees in my part of the world over here need to go to California to help them produce that $11 billion crop. And they do it in a really unique way by loading those bees onto trucks in January and February and times of the year like that, and bring them to California and help to produce pollination on an $11 billion crop that looks like that. And I don't know if they're blooming yet, but if they're not, they will be within a couple of weeks. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter tonight, Christine Gemperle.
Thank you, Pete. Let's jump right in here. Okay, well, and thank you, Elsa, for that introduction. You pretty much covered just about everything. I do work with my brother on the farm, and it's just us two. We don't have any employees, so we have a very intimate view of every aspect of almond farming. So I'm going to, come on. For whatever reason, it's not advancing. Okay.
Christine, there usually is a little itty bitty arrow in the lower left that you might have to hit the first time.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
Lower, try the other corner, lower. Yeah, okay. Usually you got to kind of, there we go.
There it goes. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of how almonds are grown. They're grown on trees in orchards in very neat rows. Our crop year begins in February, and that's when the trees burst into bloom. The California almond bloom is the biggest pollination event in the world, and it truly is spectacular and beautiful. And if you ever have the opportunity to see it, you definitely should. So most orchards consist of 2 to 3 varieties because the trees require cross-pollination. We do have self-fertile varieties now, but traditionally, the tree varieties were selected that bloomed at the same time and had compatible pollen. The almond blossoms co-evolved with insects, which transfer the pollen from variety to variety. Honeybees, because of their size of their colonies and their ability to be moved into orchard, is what actually enabled almond trees to produce enough nuts to make them commercially viable. So native pollinators, yes, they're in the orchard, but they just don't have the abundance or same activity level to get the job done. After pollination, those flowers start to develop into nutlets, and they grow through April and May to reach their full size and weight by mid-June. At this point, they are encased in a woody shell, and that is covered by the hull, which is technically the fruit part. It is because of these protective layers that we are able to harvest the almonds off of the ground with little to no damage. So after pollination, those flowers start to develop. Oops, never mind. I already said that. From June to mid or late August, we spend our time watering and preparing the orchard floor for harvest. When the nuts begin to dry out and the hull starts to split and peel away from the shell, we know we are ready to go. We have a lot of specialized equipment used just for harvesting. First, we bring in the shaker that knocks the almonds to the ground. And then the sweeper comes up and puts them into rows. And then finally, the harvester comes through and picks up those rows. The nuts are loaded into trailers and hauled off to the huller, where the shell and the hull are removed. And then they are sent to either a handler, who then may send them to a processor. And that's where they're made into all the items that you can find in your grocery store. So now we're going to talk about the orchard floor. Historically, one of our main cultural practices has always been to keep the orchard floor clean, because that enabled us a swift and easy harvest, right? We could do that with either herbicides or mowing, or disking and rolling the ground smooth, which is actually a lot of disturbance to the soil. But we really have to take into consideration where we can manage plant growth mechanically and where we can't. If I can't get into an area with my mower, then my options are to either use herbicide, flaming, or grazing. Each has its own issues. Obviously, with an herbicide, it's a chemical you're using, it's expensive, and it's not very popular. Flaming, you have to do it repeatedly because it doesn't have a long residual, and it does take a lot of energy. And then finally, grazing with animals, which, can work and does provide nitrogen for the soil, but those same animals can actually damage small trees. And then you can have food safety issues on top of that. And working with animals, that's a whole other ball of wax that most farmers don't really, have the time for. And of course, you never want to mix poop and food. But today we're going to talk about the 65% of the orchard floor that we can access, because that's where things started to change. When we went to zero vegetation to maybe a landing strip in the orchard, about 65% coverage with cover crops. And it was done with bees in mind. We have known for years that since the introduction of veromite to the U.S. honeybee populations, things have not been good for bees. But there were abundance of issues that they were also facing, like loss of habitat and insecticides from crop protection or from protecting crops. The almond board was quick to act on the pesticide exposure front by publishing the best management practice guides for growers, telling them basically what not to spray, insecticides, and when not to spray during the day when bees were active. It all makes sense given that we pay a small fortune to rent these colonies. And so why would we want to harm the very creatures that our crop depends on? And here's where Project APSM steps into the picture. They are an organization that facilitates and funds research pertaining to honeybee health. Through their research efforts, they recognize that alternative forage was needed before and after the bloom to get the colonies that came to California ready for the almond pollination and to keep them healthy and strong for when they went back to the Midwest for the summer honey flows. But there's still a lot of questions about the impact on the bees and the almonds, which the Almond Board and Pam set out to answer with research. So some of the things that we found were that the almond pollen actually contains all 14 of the essential amino acids required for bees. Amygdalin found in the almond blossom nectar and pollen actually reduces viruses and gut parasites in honeybees. Honeybees prefer almond pollen over the forage plants, which is great. We don't have to worry about competition. And bee colonies leave almond orchards stronger, larger, and healthier than when they arrived. Providing fresh water near colonies frees up more bees to forage for pollen instead of having to travel for water. And what are we still working on? We're trying to determine how much water cover crops use, or maybe what they add to the water budget, because water is everything in California. How do cover crops help to grow the microbial community in the soil? There's a lot of benefits that we've seen, but we haven't really nailed down a lot of the mechanisms. How do cover crops impact the orchard floor and canopy temperatures during freeze events? That's a real big one. And how do cover crops aid in controlling navel orangeworm and mummies? That's one of our major pests. How do they impact beneficial insects and bird populations that might be predators of almond pests? So that's what we've been looking at. So now I'm going to give you kind of an overview of how my practices have changed. I started with berms on the perimeters and quickly moved to growing the forage in the orchard rows. It was just easier, actually. One challenge was figuring out the timing of planting so it bloomed before the almond bloom, and how to weave that into a full schedule of fall work that needed to be done in the orchard without actually disturbing a new planting of cover crop. And over the years, I have tried a lot of different spreading and sowing different ways of spreading and sowing seeds, because I don't have a seed drill, unfortunately. I have tried just about every seed mix out there, and I have actually planted seed in every month from September to January. And after 5 years, what I concluded, I'm going to tell you what I concluded worked for our operation. I plant mustard in every other row early in October to take advantage of my last irrigation. And then I don't disturb it. In the other rows, that's where we complete all of our fall tasks. We stack our prunings, we shred them into wood chips, we run the shaker to knock the mummies out of the trees to the ground, we sweep the mummies into rows, and we mow the weeds if necessary. A quick note on mummies, because you're probably wondering what those are. Those are the nuts that actually sometimes stick in the trees. We get out most of them, but sometimes there are a few left behind, and they can overwinter. And the bad thing is they actually harbor a pest called the navel orangeworm. And if you don't get those mummies off the tree and destroy them, you've actually just created a pest problem for your next year's crop. So it is a part of our integrated pest management program to mummy shake. And it's an environmentally friendly method for controlling pests. So now, given with all this research, I am ready to go. Sometimes, You have to figure things out on your own. And so with my mule, I attached a battery-powered Scott's seed spreader to it, some dryer venting, and I was ready to go to do this job solo and quickly. And so after seeding in one pass with a shallow tiller, I was able to knock down the competing weeds, destroy the pest harboring mummies, incorporate the wood chips from the prunings, and sow my clover seed. And it works beautifully, both for timing and for our cultural practices. And now I had mustard starting to bloom in January and clover coming on strong after the mustard and the almond bloom waned. We have been running this program for about 5 years now and rotate the clover and the mustard about every 2 years, just so that both sides of the trees get the nitrogen fixing benefits. So one of the things I do is to gradually mow down my cover crop during the spring. At any one time, I usually have about 50 to 70% of the orchard floor covered in it between April and June. Weed suppression allowed me to back off of herbicide applications, which was definitely a benefit. Mowing the cover crop provided a mulch that actually helped conserve water and reduce the orchard floor temperatures, probably reducing evaporation. Like I said, these are things we really want to nail down with research. I saw increased beneficial insects. I mean, it's almost like I have an infestation of ladybugs during the spring. It's fabulous. And because of it, I was able to reduce our insecticide sprays by 2/3 with no negative impacts. We no longer have mite problems because of it. And we also saw that the water infiltration into the soil had definitely improved. To take the guesswork out of starting cover cropping, the Almond Board created the guide, and it does take into account some of the trade-offs. There are many ways to employ cover crops, and every practice we do, whether it is conventional, sustainable, regenerative, or organic, comes with one or more trade-offs. Because every great farming practice can have unintended negative impacts. Bees love cover crops and thrive in them, and so do gophers. And it can be a problem because they eat the roots of small trees and they make a mess of the orchard floor. And the cover crop actually helps to hide them from predators like owls. So initially, cover cropping had a slow start, but little by little, more farmers started to catch on. The best advertising was when a farmer drives by your place and says, "Hey, what is she doing all those flowers in her orchard? But damn, those trees look good." So it's not that they don't want to do it. It's just that you have to understand that a farmer is a very cautious creature. They have a lot at stake every year with every crop. But you can see here in 2022, we had a 47% increase. And of that increase, 72% was in almonds. And those farmers that were getting that free seed actually continued to do the practice even when the free seed was gone. And for the first time, the seed was actually delivered early enough so farmers could get it in the ground in October so that the mustard could be blooming by January. So, I mean, it is a risky business, farming. And farmers are at the mercy of things that are completely out of their control, like weather, and even more recently, like pandemics or shipping line problems, supply chains, global economies, and a war. So where are we headed and what's the prognosis? 3 years ago, the Blue Diamond Growers Co-op, which I am a member of, decided it was going to reward growers offering an incentive for employing the best management practices laid out by the Almond Board guides, such as planting cover crops and hedgerows, right? They also had to become bee-friendly certified. It is called the Orchard Stewardship Incentive Program, or OSIP. And Blue Diamond incorporated the Almond Board's CASP program, which stands for California Almond Stewardship Platform. It's a tongue twister. To gather data and document the practices that growers are doing. And they also partnered with PAM to help growers to access cover crop seeds through the Seeds for Bees program. PAM also facilitated the Water for Bees program with Blue Diamond by securing funding to provide water basins for growers to put out for the bees. And through these efforts, the number of cover cropped acres has jumped 40% in the last 2 years in Blue Diamond's membership. And we only expect this to continue to grow through the industry, maybe even faster among Blue Diamond's over 3,000 growers who were just awarded a substantial Climate Smart grant. It's aimed at increasing cover crops and hedgerows, and with the intentions of improving pollinator health, both native and honeybees, and sequestering carbon. We haven't even gotten into dedicated pollinator habitat on working farms yet, but those are increasing in number too. And so as a final note, I'm going to share the success story of my tiny California prairie. We have a designated pollinator habitat on our farm and have so for the last 4 years. And I will tell you, if you grow it, they will come. Last year, I had 4 monarch butterfly sightings on the farm and 1 egg sighting, actually, after establishing milkweed plants. And I have never seen a monarch butterfly in my 25 years on this farm. I have native bee species and bumblebees that I have not seen before or haven't seen for a while. We are still growing our permanent habitat in unused areas around the edges of the farm. And this fall, we have 20,000 square feet of hedgerow plantings going in. And so, as we should, we are continuing to learn and we're continuing to grow. So overall, I mean, I am a farmer. The goal is to keep growing food and providing food for a nation and globally. But it's also to protect the land we work and the species we need to grow that food sustainably, and the people and the communities like beekeepers that we partner with to make this happen. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Christine. Let's see. So now I come back to sharing my screen, which is right here. All right. There we go. So I thank you very much, Christine. Fascinating story. And you have the best description. If you build it, they will come. And I've never seen it more applicable than to pollinator habitat. So that's a cool aspect of the story. So now I want to tell you a little bit about the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund and kind of how we go about doing business, and let your mind wander to think about how we might be able to work with you. So we perform and establish what we refer to as next gen conservation habitat projects. And we do that in a couple of ways. One, we provide free seed mixtures on projects that are 2 acres in size or larger. It's open to public land, private land, corporate land, which should be interpreted really as any land. And we don't just give you the seed and say, hey, good luck. We provide one-on-one technical guidance on how to work your way through that project to produce a great outcome. And we call this next gen conservation because we bring a lot of innovation to how we design and establish pollinator habitat. One of our innovative methods is that we actually design and use 2 different seed mixtures on every project. One we refer to as a honeybee seed mixture, and the other one we call a monarch butterfly seed mixture. Both of these seed mixtures provide tremendous pollinator value, but they function very differently. our honeybee seed mix, which is what this is a picture of, establishes really fast. This is actually a photo 2 months after it was planted. And it includes things like clovers that are very, very beneficial to bee species, both managed bees, honeybees, and native bees. They really, really benefit from clover species. So this establishes very quickly. What we call our monarch butterfly mix establishes much, much more slowly. We often refer to it as in year 1, it sleeps, in year 2, it creeps, and in year 3, it leaps. And that does not mean that there's not benefit to it in years 1 and 2, but many of the species that we include in a seed mixture like this establish very slowly and over time. This seed mixture will be 100% native wildflower species. Our bottom line is it has to have at least 40 species in it, but it's more likely to have 60 to 70 wildflower species, all designed to establish and work in that geography, in that soil type, and with that project's objectives. So they provide a lot of benefit, but we don't mix them together. We plant them separately. So how might we do that? Here's an example of a 6-acre field, and we could simply plant the honeybee mix on one half of it and the monarch butterfly mix on the other half. Or we can do things that are a little bit more strategic and creative, where we take that same 6-acre field and we plant the honeybee mix around the perimeter of it and the monarch butterfly mix in the center of it. And here's an example of a project. Well, let me back up and say, why would we do this? Why is this important? Think of the honeybee mix as being the moat around the castle, and the monarch mix is the castle. Here's an example of what that kind of looks like. This is a 1-year planting, but the honeybee mix you can kind of see is around the perimeter of this, and this is our monarch mix in the center. Can also kind of describe it as a picture with a frame around it. This is important because the honeybee mix is green, greens up really early in the year and stays green throughout the year, so that if we wanted to prescribe a controlled burn to the monarch mix, which is a great management tool, we can do it more safely because that honeybee mix will act like a green fire break around the perimeter of what we're trying to burn. I also want to tell you that when we talk about innovation and next gen conservation, we have 4 different research studies that are looking at what kind of benefit and value, pollinator value, are we getting from our seed mixtures. And I'm happy to show you the results of one of those 4 studies tonight that was conducted with our friends at the U.S. Geological Survey. And in that survey, USGS looked at all the available habitat that a pollinator could use: roadsides, pastures, crop ground, national wildlife refuges, land that was enrolled in the USDA Conservation Reserve Program, hay ground, and bee and butterfly habitat fund plantings. And in that study, they learned that bee and butterfly habitat fund pollinator projects had about twice as many flowers as anything else that was on the landscape, that we had about 3 times the number of honeybee visits, and we had 8 times the native bee visits and use. And that applied across the entirety of the year. So here's 2 graphs that look at early in the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year. And they compare the bee and butterfly habitat fund plantings to all kinds of conservation program plantings. CP42 is actually a USDA conservation program that's designed specifically to benefit pollinators. And we have more species in our plantings, and we have more flowers in our plantings throughout the entirety of the year. So we're very excited about those benefits and kind of strategically thinking about how we can make every acre the best it can be. All right. So one of the things that we strive to do is to find a reason to say yes to a project. If a project has a high likelihood of having a good pollinator outcome, we want to find a reason to say yes to working on it. And I'm going to refer back again to this guide that we have. And in this guide, one of the things that you will hear about is a site preparation technique that is referred to as the gold plan. And the gold plan, here's an example of what it looks like. This is a photo that was taken. This is actually a block in a city that this landowner right here owned this area, and it was planted to grass, and every 7 to 10 days, they would have to mow it. They decided we would love to, in this city, have this area be devoted to pollinator habitat. So the gold plan actually prescribes taking this area and planting it to soybeans for one growing season. And then in the fall, we plant our pollinator seed mixture into this area. And it produces phenomenal results. And that's why it's referred to as the gold plan. So what are the opportunities for collaboration? I kind of want to wind my piece up here by just giving you some examples of things to think about. And I'm happy to say that I believe our model in this photo is actually on tonight's webinar, Mark Sundberg. The bread and butter of our projects are working with landowners. And Mark Sundberg and his wife are standing here in their project that followed the gold plan, and they're standing in this 15 months after it was planted. When you follow the right site preparation techniques, the right planting techniques, and you have a gold star pollinator seed mixture, these are the kind of results that you can get from your project. We want to work closely with agriculture. We already talked about this a little bit, but we need to find every acre we can of pollinator habitat and then make it the best it can be. We also talked about finding multiple benefits from as many projects as possible. Renewable energy is one of those great opportunities. So if you're listening to this tonight and you hear about a solar energy project that's coming to your community, to your county, to your part of the world, raise your hand, ask the question, is that going to be pollinator friendly? And the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund would be happy to try and help make that happen. Corporate campuses, here's an example of a project that we're working on with a corporation where they turned a piece of their corporate campus into pollinator habitat with hiking trails through it and sitting benches and things like that for their employees. Precision agriculture, really that's a lot of what Christine has talked about tonight, how they've taken the alleys in their almond orchard and developed multiple benefits, soil health benefits, pollinator benefits, water conservation benefits, benefits from the reduction of insecticides that are used, working with agriculture in this example to create a buffer to keep those ag chemicals out of our water, or identifying portions of a farm or ranch that are underperforming, and establishing pollinator habitat on that can be a great collaboration. Here's a unique one. We seem to be working with more and more municipalities every day that have something like a wastewater treatment plant. And this area is surrounded by grass, and every 7 to 10 days in the summer, their staff are out there mowing these areas up. What a great opportunity to reduce their maintenance costs, mowing, and convert that to pollinator habitat. That's an exciting example of a win-win for that local municipality. Utility right-of-ways, another great example where we have literally hundreds of thousands of acres that could be producing pollinator benefit. City parks, bike trails, All of those kinds of things are the types of projects that we're working with. And really, again, they're all designed to bring together diverse, unique interests. Pollinators are a unique glue that can connect to water quality, soil health, food sustainability, crop production, monarch butterflies, grassland songbirds, and on and on and on. So I'm going to close this out tonight by saying that everybody that's listening to this webinar tonight, and thank you so much for your participation, there's something that you can do. Number one, if you think that you know of an opportunity for a project, get a hold of us. We would love to chat with you about it. If you would like to co-host a webinar, just like we did with Christine tonight, to get to an even broader audience of people, let us know. We would love to do that. If you have an opportunity for us to give you flyers that talk about our habitat program called Seed a Legacy, I believe that link will be in the chat for you to check out that flyer, but also hit us up in the chat section and we will send you copies of flyers. Think about making a gift that grows. Gifts that grow. You might have seen a little blurb about it in the pre-webinar video that was running, but this is an opportunity, especially with something like Valentine's Day coming up. If you were thinking about giving your loved one a nice bouquet of flowers, very nice, nice job, good on you, but that bouquet of flowers is going to last about 5 days, right? Well, how about taking that same cost, about $100, making a contribution to the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund, and we take that and turn it into a half-acre field of wildflowers. You receive a e-certificate to present to your loved one to tell them that a half-acre of wildflowers is being established in their name. And every one of those projects is guaranteed to be there for a minimum of 5 years. So 5 days, 5 years. Gifts that grow. And then finally, I guess just like and follow us on all the social media channels. There's a bunch out there, and we're posting things very regularly and appreciate your help and support. So with that, I thank you very much for your participation tonight. Elsa's going to come back and lead us through the questions that have come on, and we look forward to chatting with you tonight more.
Thank you, Pete. We have several questions, and just a reminder for those that do have a question, please type that into the Q&A section, not the chat section. We're going to look for questions in the Q&A section. That's at the bottom of your screen. And we'll start out with one. And I think this probably was for Christine, but I think you both probably have some input here. Can you tell us why there are no native seeds used in cover cropping systems? Or are there?
Well, actually, no, we're not using a lot of, we use the native seeds more in our designated pollinator habitat around the edge, but when you're using it within an orchard, you have to look at the functionality of it and how it actually fits into the work that you're doing in the orchard. Because, at the end of the day, you are growing a crop, right? And it's the cover crop isn't paying your bills. The food that you're growing is paying the bills. And so we're looking at plants that actually do a lot of things for us. Obviously, with the clover, it's great for the nitrogen fixing, but some plants we're putting in there because of their deep roots, right? And we also want plants in there that actually want to germinate and start growing in the fall, and then have most of their life cycle in our winter and into the spring, but then sort of naturally are done for the season and dry up. And then that gives us time to prepare our orchard by mowing that down and having it actually decompose back into the soil, so that by the time harvest comes around, there's nothing on the ground anymore, and it's part of the soil once again.
Great. Pete, did you have anything to add there?
Nope, she handled that one great.
Great. I have had several questions in the Q&A about water usage of almonds. One of the questions was, does it really take a gallon of water to grow one almond? And then the other question went on a little bit more about water and how does cover cropping impact water needs for the almonds?
Okay. Well, I'll take that one. Actually, yes, almonds do take a gallon of water per nut, but everything you stick in your mouth, and I answered this actually in the Q&A if anybody wants to read it, because it is my favorite thing to answer. Everything we stick in our mouth takes water to grow. Some things take more than almonds, some things take less than almonds. And they have all these other factors that play into, is it a good use of water or is it not a good use of water, right? So with almonds, it's very nutritionally dense. It's protein, and any protein takes more water. Like legumes take more water because they are like a bean, a protein source. So that's one thing. The thing that almonds have going for them is that they actually there are almost zero waste crop. The New York Times did a piece on it because it's not perishable. And we were able to take virtually everything out of the orchard without damage. We aren't leaving much behind. So all the water that we put into it, we actually get something out of it, as opposed to if you've ever gone by a watermelon field after they've harvested and there's like a million watermelons there. Not to bag on watermelons, but it's just the nature of the crop. And then we have byproducts that actually have uses, like the almond hull that I talked about. That is fed to cows, and that actually helps dairy reduce their water footprint because they have to use less water intensive crops like alfalfa. So, and I could talk about whole orchard recycling, another great thing, but I'll just touch on the cover crop. We're really looking now at whether the cover crop is adding water to our systems or a net zero or using more water. And it's actually research going on in my place by a UC Davis doctorate candidate. And we're going to get those answers. But preliminarily, the cover crop isn't taking a heck of a lot more water if it's taking more water at all. So we might be at a net zero, and we have so many benefits that come with it. Even if it is a little bit more water, it might just be worth it.
Well, we certainly hope that you'll keep us tuned in on that, because that'll be some interesting research.
Oh yeah, I want first dibs on that research.
Well, we're going to do part 2 of this webinar series, probably March, and you probably won't have any answers by then, Christine, but we'll certainly be looking at some other things then when we have that discussion. So there's a couple more questions here. Anthony asks, although there are no other places on earth with this size of the agricultural almond effort, do you know there are other almond growing sites? And if so, do they encounter the similar issues for us, the bee pollination and then the use of the water?
Yeah, everywhere the almond is growing successfully is a dry climate, because the almond has evolved for a Mediterranean climate. They grow them in Australia. We know Australia is dry like here and has water issues. They grow them in Spain. In fact, they dry farm them in Spain, but they also, whereas we might get 2,000 pounds an acre on average, they get 500 pounds an acre on average, which is quite a bit smaller. And because we have a very advanced irrigation system out here and water storage, that's what's enabled us to actually do what we've done. I mean, we're actually producing so much more food on the same amount of land that they, say an acre here and an acre in Spain, big differences on food production. And bees, up until just this year, bees didn't have quite the problems in Australia because they didn't have varroa mite, but this was the first year that they encountered varroa mite, and it's a big deal. And they're really trying to keep that population down.
Yeah.
So this is another one for Christine. Have you seen any negative impacts to the use of cover crops?
Just the gophers I was talking about, but I got a pack of 6 dogs. And I'm doing some groundwater recharge as we speak right now, and it's a great opportunity to get some gophers.
Okay.
So yeah, a little bit extra work.
Also, I'm gonna give a little plug for the next webinar that we'll do with Christine that's kind of talking about almonds a little bit, and I want to throw out a couple of numbers. So Christine, while we were on the webinar, I went to Google and I Googled a couple things up, and it tells me that in 2021, there were 1.64 million acres of almonds in California. That includes non-bearing, which it takes about 5 years for an almond tree to produce fruit, right?
Yeah, 3 or 4 if you're a good farmer.
Yeah. All right. 3 for Christine, 5 if I was an almond farmer, is what she's saying there. So it includes the non-bearing ones, but 1.64 million acres. And we know, or at least historically, maybe it's changing, but historically, an almond grower needed to have about 2 beehives per acre to fulfill their pollination needs and that sort of thing. So also in 2021, there was an estimate that there was 2.7 million beehives in the US. And that includes my 6 that don't move anywhere, but it includes hobbyists and backyard beekeepers and that sort of thing. So if we need to be somewhere in the vicinity of 2 hives per acre, and there's going to be 1.64 million acres of almonds in the near future, 2 times 1.64 produces a number that is larger than 2.7 million hives, which makes for a really unique situation. That's kind of a little teaser that I think those are some of the things that we'll talk about. And again, talk about how what happens in California is significantly influenced by what happens in my part of the world where I'm at, and how important pollinator forage in the Midwest can be to what's happening for almond growers in California. That's a teaser. Stay tuned.
Right.
Well, we're going to do one more question, but I do want to, Mark Sundberg, who was pictured in this program, he typed in a few things and I don't think they're visible to the whole audience. So I'm going to read what he has typed in here for you. Then I'll ask my last question. Mark says, I'm 5 years into this Seed of Legacy planting now, and I'm still amazed by how many insects, most notably to me, bees, I see in the 18 acres. I highly recommend this seed mix. So, and I also spoke with Mark, and he said he's seen pheasants on the property that he hadn't seen before. So for him, he's in Minnesota, Otter Tail County, Minnesota, and he's also a beekeeper. He's the president of his state's beekeeping association as well. So just a plug from him, and I will ask my last question. There was one more in here, Pete, about the idea of these 2 pollinator seed mixes. Never heard of another habitat program that has taken this innovative approach. Why the 2 seed mixes? And what does that do for the bees versus just planting a honeybee mix specific?
Well, so we talked about that a little bit. Number one, they're both really, both seed mixtures are really beneficial to pollinator health and habitat, but they provide benefits in kind of a different timeline. And it's like well, I'm trying to think of what analogy I want to make. They just are designed thinking differently, and how they establish and how aggressive they are is different. One establishes really fast and one establishes really slow. And so they just don't blend together very well. And that's not rocket science or anything, but it was a real significant innovation to say, why don't we use 2 seed mixtures on every project and maximize the amount of benefit that we're going to get out of it? So it was very innovative. And that's just one of the reasons why we use that term next gen conservation projects.
Right. Well, I think that's going to wrap up our time. I know there was a few questions that were left unanswered, but we will get back with you and shoot you an email to answer the questions that are still left in our Q&A section.
Yeah, and then I would just add that there are people that registered and the real world came up and they couldn't make it. Everybody that is registered will receive an email with a link to this recording. So you also have the opportunity to share this presentation with people that weren't on tonight's call. So thank you, everybody that was on here. We enjoy these conversations. We try to come up with a new webinar topic every month and a half or so. So keep following us and we'll keep doing more interesting webinars.